Hello, fellow history lovers and English learners. Welcome back to our cozy storytelling corner. Have you ever wondered if a single person can change the entire world with just a dream and a pile of glowing dust? Can the quiet strength of one soul break through the hardest walls of time, prejudice, and endless hardship? Is it truly possible to find an eternal light hidden deep within the most absolute darkness? Today, we are going to walk slowly through the dusty pages of history to meet a remarkable woman who answered all of these profound questions with her very life. She was a devoted daughter, a starving student, a loving wife, and a caring mother, but to the wider world, she became an immortal legend. She discovered invisible elements that the human eye had never seen, and she forcefully opened massive doors that had been locked tight for many centuries. Her story is not just about science. It is a profound epic of human endurance, a heartbreaking tale of love and loss, and a beautiful testament to the power of a curious mind. Join me as we explore the beautiful, heartbreaking, and deeply inspiring journey of Marie Curie, the extraordinary woman who willingly gave her entire life to the glowing light of scientific discovery. Chapter 1: The Daughter of a Lost Land. In the year 1867, in the historic city of Warsaw, Poland, a little girl named Maria Sklodowska was born into a cold world that desperately wanted to keep her quiet. At that specific time in history, the proud nation of Poland did not officially exist on the map. It was firmly under the heavy control of the powerful Russian Empire. The beautiful Polish language was strictly forbidden in all public schools, and the rich, ancient history of her people was hidden away like a dangerous secret. Maria was the youngest of 5 children, and her modest home was constantly filled with the comforting smell of old, leather-bound books and the soft, steady sound of quiet study. Her father was a dedicated teacher of physics and mathematics, and her mother was the respected principal of a local school for girls. They were certainly not rich in money or material possessions, but they were incredibly rich in knowledge, culture, and a deep love for learning. Little Maria was a child with a mind exactly like a sponge, eagerly soaking up every single word, every complex equation, and every new idea she could possibly find. However, the harsh reality of life was not kind to young Maria. When she was only 7 years old, a dark cloud of tragedy entered her home. Her beloved eldest sister, Zofia, died of a terrible, sweeping sickness called typhus. Only 3 short years later, another devastating shadow fell heavily over the fragile family when her gentle mother passed away from tuberculosis. The sudden loss of her mother and sister was a heavy, cold stone in Maria's young heart. She looked closely at her grieving father, who was struggling bravely to keep the broken family together, and she realized very early that life was a relentless battle. But instead of surrendering to sorrow, Maria found her ultimate comfort inside her books. In the quiet, lonely corners of her home, she dreamed vividly of a better place where women could learn freely and where the human mind was completely unchained. In Poland during that era, young women were legally not allowed to attend any formal university. This unfair rule was a massive, solid wall that seemed completely impossible to climb over. Despite these heavy restrictions, the fire of rebellion and curiosity burned brightly inside Maria. She and her older sister Bronia discovered a clandestine gathering known as the Flying University. This was a secret, underground educational enterprise in Warsaw that bravely defied the Russian authorities by teaching Polish youth, especially women, in hidden locations that constantly changed to avoid police detection. In these dark, hidden rooms, Maria tasted the sweet freedom of higher education. But she knew this was not enough. She needed a real laboratory and a recognized degree. So, Maria and Bronia made a desperate, loving secret plan. They promised to help each other survive. Maria would work far away as a governess to earn enough money to pay for Bronia's expensive medical studies in Paris. Then, once Bronia became a successful doctor, she would return the favor and help Maria pay for her own scientific studies. It was a beautiful promise built on pure sisterly love and a shared, desperate thirst for knowledge. For several long, lonely years, Maria worked far away in the quiet countryside, teaching the children of wealthy, privileged families. She was deeply isolated, and the harsh Polish winters were incredibly long and bitterly cold. She spent her silent, freezing nights reading advanced chemistry and physics textbooks by the weak, flickering light of a small candle. She felt exactly like a wild bird trapped inside a small cage, constantly watching the distant horizon and patiently waiting for her long-delayed turn to fly. She wrote deeply emotional letters to her father, telling him all about her impossible dreams of doing real science. Even when she felt physically exhausted and mentally discouraged, she absolutely never stopped studying. She carefully saved every single penny she earned, eating very little food and wearing old, worn-out clothes, all for the distant hope of buying a precious train ticket to France. She was mentally preparing herself for an epic journey that would finally take her far away from the snowy, silent streets of Warsaw to the beating heart of the global scientific world. Chapter 2. The Laboratory of Dreams and Dust. In the autumn of the year 1891, Maria finally arrived in the bustling, romantic city of Paris. She was 24 years old, full of hope, and she quickly changed her name to the French version, Marie. She had very little money in her pockets, and she lived alone in a tiny, uncomfortable attic room. This small room was absolutely freezing during the dark winter months and boiling hot during the bright summer days. Sometimes, she was so deeply focused on her intense studies at the famous Sorbonne University that she completely forgot to eat her meals. She would survive simply on hard bread, a little dark chocolate, and warm tea for many days at a time. But she honestly did not mind the painful hunger or the biting cold. For the very first time in her entire life, she was completely free to learn anything she wanted. She proudly sat in the very front row of her crowded classes, listening closely to the greatest scientific minds of the 19th century. She was one of the very few women in the entire university, but she quickly proved to everyone that her brilliant mind was second to none. It was during this exciting time of academic discovery that she finally met a quiet, deeply thoughtful man named Pierre Curie. Pierre was already a highly respected scientist, widely known for his groundbreaking work on crystals and magnetism. He was a pure scientist. He was absolutely not interested in social fame, political power, or making money. He only cared deeply about discovering the hidden truths of the vast universe. When he first met Marie, he instantly found a rare soul that perfectly matched his own. They did not talk about common, everyday things like the weather or city gossip. They talked passionately about complex physics, about the distant stars, and about the invisible mysteries of nature. They fell deeply in love, not just with each other's personalities, but with their intense, shared passion for scientific discovery. They were happily married in the year 1895 in a very simple, quiet ceremony. Instead of wearing a fancy, expensive white wedding dress, Marie wore a practical, dark blue laboratory outfit. Their legendary scientific work together began in a small, leaky, wooden shed that had once been used by young medical students to study dead bodies. It was certainly not a grand, clean laboratory filled with expensive, shiny tools. It was a miserable place of damp dirt, cold drafts, and exhausting physical labor. At that specific time, a scientist named Henri Becquerel had recently discovered that a heavy metal called uranium gave off strange, invisible rays of energy. Marie was completely fascinated by this mysterious phenomenon. She bravely decided to investigate these invisible rays for her doctoral thesis. She began to test many different natural minerals and soon found that a mineral called pitchblende showed much higher levels of radiation than pure uranium itself. She brilliantly realized there must be an entirely new, unknown element hidden deep inside the heavy rock. It was Marie who officially coined the term radioactivity to describe this incredible, natural glowing energy. For 4 extremely long and agonizing years, Marie and Pierre worked tirelessly in that freezing, damp shed. They personally boiled thousands of pounds of heavy, dirty rock and giant, boiling pots. Marie stirred the thick, boiling mixture with heavy iron rods that were almost as tall and heavy as she was. Her gentle hands were frequently burned, her skin was constantly cracked, and her lungs were filled with toxic, chemical smoke, but she absolutely never stopped searching for the secret source of the glow. Finally, in the year 1898, their relentless hard work paid off. They discovered not just one, but two entirely new chemical elements. Marie proudly named the first one polonium, as a beautiful tribute to her beloved, oppressed home country of Poland. The second element was much more powerful, and they named it radium. In the absolute darkness of their miserable shed, the small glass tubes of pure radium glowed with a beautiful, ghostly blue light. Marie and Pierre would sit quietly in the dark at night, watching the magical glow and feeling a profound sense of wonder. Chapter 3. The Price of the Golden Prize. The entire scientific world soon began to notice the incredible, groundbreaking work of the humble Curies. In the year 1903, the prestigious Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences proudly announced that the Nobel Prize in Physics would be awarded for the magnificent discovery of radioactivity. However, there was a great, terrible injustice floating in the air. The traditional committee originally intended to give the ultimate prize only to Henri Becquerel and Pierre Curie, deliberately leaving Marie completely out simply because she was a woman. When Pierre heard about this unfair decision, he showed the immense strength of his moral character and his deep, unwavering love for Marie. He immediately wrote a strong, formal letter to the committee, stating clearly that he would absolutely not accept the prestigious prize unless Marie was equally recognized. He firmly insisted that the brilliant discovery was hers just as much as it was his. The committee finally agreed to change their minds, and Marie Curie proudly became the very first woman in human history to win a Nobel Prize. But sudden international fame was a very heavy, unwanted burden for the quiet, private couple. They were constantly chased by aggressive newspaper reporters and curious photographers who did not truly understand their complex scientific work, but were simply fascinated by their romantic story. The Curies only wanted to be left completely alone in their quiet laboratory to continue their important research. Furthermore, they were both becoming very sick. The magical, glowing radium they handled with their bare hands every single day was slowly, secretly poisoning their bodies. They constantly felt deeply tired, their bones ached, and their skin was often sore, red, and badly burned. They simply did not understand yet that the invisible radiation was violently damaging their living cells. Despite the growing physical pain, they bravely continued to work. Pierre was finally given a respected professorship at the Sorbonne, and they had two beautiful daughters, Irene and Eve. For a brief, golden moment, it seemed like they had achieved everything they had ever dreamed of. Then, unimaginable tragedy struck their lives with the sudden, violent force of a dark storm. In the year 1906, on a very gloomy, rainy afternoon in Paris, Pierre was walking across a busy, crowded street. He was deeply lost in his own thoughts, perhaps thinking about a complex new experiment or a difficult mathematical problem. He simply did not see a massive, heavy horse-drawn wagon coming rapidly toward him. In a tragic second, he slipped heavily on the rain-slicked stones of the street, and the heavy wheels of the massive wagon crushed him. He died instantly at the young age of 46. Marie was completely and utterly devastated. Her perfect scientific partner, her absolute best friend, and the profound love of her life was suddenly gone in a single, cruel heartbeat. The world around her lost all its vibrant color. The French government respectfully offered her a financial pension to support her family, but she proudly refused to accept it, stating firmly that she was still young enough to work and support her own children. Instead of hiding in the dark shadows of her immense grief, Marie bravely took over Pierre's teaching position at the Sorbonne. By doing this, she historically became the very first female professor in the university's entire 700-year history. The day of her very first official lecture was a massive, historic event. Hundreds of people from all over the city crowded tightly into the lecture hall, expecting to hear a highly emotional, crying speech about her tragic loss. But Marie walked in slowly, looking very pale and dressed entirely in black mourning clothes. She stood silently at the desk, and then she simply began her lecture exactly at the precise sentence where Pierre had left off in his very last class. She chose to honor his memory through the continuation of science rather than through public tears. She continued their complex research entirely alone. In the year 1911, she incredibly won a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry. She remains the only person in history to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 completely different scientific fields. Chapter 4. The Long Shadow of the Laboratory. As the long years slowly passed, the dark shadows grew much longer for Marie. The devastating global conflict of the First World War violently began in the year 1914, and Marie immediately saw a practical way to use her vast scientific knowledge to actively save human lives. She astutely realized that thousands of young soldiers were dying painfully on the battlefield simply because military doctors could not clearly see the hidden metal bullets or the shattered bones inside their bleeding bodies. She brilliantly created the very first mobile X-ray units, which the grateful soldiers affectionately called Little Curies. These were small, sturdy vans specially equipped with portable X-ray machines that could travel directly to the dangerous front lines of the war. Marie herself bravely learned how to drive the heavy trucks and how to mechanically repair the engines. She fearlessly traveled to the most dangerous, explosive areas of the bloody war, often accompanied by her brave teenage daughter, Irene. Together, the mother and daughter tirelessly trained hundreds of military nurses and battlefield doctors on exactly how to use the life-saving X-ray technology. Hundreds of thousands of young lives were ultimately saved from amputation and death because of her immense courage and her quick, practical thinking. However, after the brutal war finally ended, Marie returned quietly to her laboratory research, but her own physical health was failing very rapidly. She had spent many long decades carelessly carrying small glass tubes of highly radioactive radium directly in her apron pockets. She had spent countless hours breathing in the deeply toxic, invisible fumes of her chemical experiments. Her beautiful eyes began to fail terribly from thick cataracts, making it very hard for her to see clearly, and her blood was no longer healthy or strong. She became extremely thin, frail, and pale, looking almost like a ghost, but she absolutely never complained about her pain. Despite her extreme physical weakness, she bravely traveled across the ocean to the United States of America 2 times, where she was warmly welcomed by massive crowds as a global hero. The generous women of America had successfully raised a huge amount of money to buy a single, precious gram of pure radium for her continued research. President Warren Harding proudly presented it to her at the White House. She was deeply touched by the immense kindness of these foreign strangers, but she always felt very uncomfortable with the loud, grand parties and the bright, flashing lights of fame. She strongly preferred the absolute quiet and safety of her dusty laboratory, where she could still softly feel the comforting, invisible presence of her beloved Pierre in the complex experiments they had originally started together. She spent her final, lonely years establishing the famous Curie Institute in Paris and another similar institute in her beloved hometown of Warsaw. These modern medical centers were specifically dedicated to using controlled radiation to actively treat dangerous cancer tumors, a brand new medical field called radiotherapy. She desperately wanted to ensure that the dangerous element that had slowly taken so much of her own health would eventually give something incredibly valuable back to the world in the form of physical healing. In the hot month of July, in the year 1934, Marie Curie finally passed away at the age of 66. She died of aplastic anemia. This terrible blood disease was directly caused by her long, unprotected exposure to massive amounts of radiation. She was quietly buried next to Pierre in a peaceful cemetery. Her physical body, her handwritten notebooks, her wooden furniture, and even her simple cookbooks are still highly radioactive today. They are carefully kept locked inside heavy, lead-lined boxes because they are still far too dangerous for anyone to safely touch. Chapter 5. A Legacy of Light and Courage. Today, as we look back across the vast ocean of time, we must remember Marie Curie not merely as a brilliant scientist, but as a shining, eternal symbol of what the unstoppable human spirit can truly achieve. Her relentless, exhausting work laid the absolute foundation for modern physics and modern medicine. Without her brave sacrifices, we simply would not have the advanced radiation treatments that successfully save millions of desperate cancer patients every single year. We would not fully understand the deeply complex, invisible, very small particles that fundamentally make up our entire physical universe. But her beautiful, lasting legacy is actually much more than just cold science and mathematical equations. She violently shattered the thick, invisible glass ceiling for ambitious women everywhere, proving completely and undeniably that true genius knows absolutely no gender. She showed the whole world that a quiet girl from a poor, occupied country could rise to become the most famous and respected scientist in history. Marie Curie once wisely said, "Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood." Now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less. These profound, beautiful words still echo loudly in the long, quiet halls of universities and modern laboratories all over the world today. They serve to constantly remind us to remain deeply curious, to always ask difficult questions, and to absolutely never be afraid of the dark unknown. Her entire life was a remarkably long, painful, yet beautiful journey from the dark, oppressed streets of Warsaw to the incredibly glowing, bright light of the international Nobel stage. Yet, through all the fame and all the sorrow, she never once forgot exactly who she was. She remained perfectly humble, fiercely dedicated, and deeply committed to uncovering the absolute truth of nature. Her brilliant daughter, Irene, wonderfully went on to win her very own Nobel Prize, proudly continuing the incredible family tradition of scientific excellence and public service. As we deeply reflect on her epic story, we clearly see a solitary woman who willingly gave absolutely everything she had for the pure sake of a beautiful dream. She gave away her physical health, her personal comfort, and her precious time, all to finally answer the relentless, burning call of her own deep curiosity. She clearly showed all of us that the most beautiful, valuable things in this entire world are very often hidden deeply inside the hardest, dirtiest rocks, and that it takes a very special, rare kind of patience to finally find them. Her deeply moving story is a powerful reminder that every single one of us has a bright, glowing light hidden deep within our own souls, just waiting patiently to be discovered. Whether we are struggling to study a difficult new language, bravely exploring a completely new, strange city, or simply trying to solve a heavy, painful problem in our own personal lives, we can always look directly to the memory of Marie Curie for endless inspiration. Now, as we finally finish this long, emotional journey through the magnificent life of Marie Curie, I want you to sit quietly and think deeply about your own life. What is your own personal radium? What is the hidden passion, the secret dream, or the beautiful goal that keeps you working hard through your own long, cold, and lonely nights? Are you truly willing to bravely face the dark shadows in order to eventually find your own glowing light? Marie Curie's extraordinary life teaches us the greatest lesson of all. We must absolutely never let our difficult circumstances, our lack of money, or the unfair opinions of others define our true potential. She was cruelly told she couldn't learn because she was Polish, and she was told she couldn't be a real scientist because she was a woman. She completely ignored all of those negative voices and listened only to the quiet, steady voice of her own brave heart. That is a profound lesson that is just as important and true today as it was over 100 years ago. Thank you so much for spending this precious time with me here in our quiet storytelling corner. I truly hope that Marie Curie's incredible journey has deeply touched your heart and given you fresh, new strength for your own difficult path. Learning a new language like English is very much like a long scientific discovery. It takes a lot of time, immense patience, and a great deal of daily practice. But the final reward of understanding a completely new world is truly beyond measure. If you sincerely enjoyed this epic story today, please take a moment to share your personal thoughts with us. What specific part of Marie's difficult, beautiful life inspired you the most? Do you truly believe that one single, determined person can change the entire course of human history? Let's keep this wonderful, inspiring conversation going in the comments below. Until next time, keep dreaming big, keep exploring the unknown, and most importantly, keep learning. Goodbye for now, and I will see you in the next story.